Today's shiur will begin 5 lines from the top of Daf Lamed. On the side of the Gemara, you will notice that we have a Nosei/Mivneh heading, and we also indicate that it's Ad Omid Beis. In other words, this discussion continues, covering all of this Omid and spilling onto the next Omid as well. We feature here or Chamisha Tanoim, 5 Tanaic opinions. De'ein Sheni Oisa Shlishi B'chulin, that when something reaches a Sheni level of Tumah, if it's Chulin, it will not create a 3rd level in Chulin. In other words, a Sheni can affect a piece of Truma, a piece of Kodshim, of sacrificial meat, but a Sheni will not affect another piece of Chulin. Just by way of general disclaimer, as far as today's shiur is concerned, it is predicated on a well-founded knowledge of our previous shiur, Daf Chavtes. So if you're a first-time listener, by all means, listen to our previous shiur in order to have a foundation for what we're going to say today. For those who heard our previous shiur and understood it, we're not going to repeat the basic points that we covered in our previous shiur, but we're going to work with the assumption that you're familiar with them, so that if things appear to be a little unclear because of, we'll say, lack of explanation, understand that we're basing ourselves on our previous shiur. So now we turn to the Gemara. Omar Rav Asi, Omar Rav, the Amri Law, another version of names, Omar Rabba ben Isi Omar Rav. And now here's a list of 5 Tanoim: Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Ozer, Rabbi Eliezer. Kulhu, Sviraluhu, they all are of the opinion, the Ein Sheni Oisa Shlishi B'chulin, that something that is Tomei to the tune of a Sheni level of Tumah, when it comes into contact with another piece of Chulin, the other piece of Chulin will not be affected. The diamonds, as you understood from our introductory remarks, highlight each one of these names. So if you just skim ahead, you can see immediately of Rabbi Meir, a few lines later Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Ozer, and then at the bottom of the, close to the bottom of the Omid, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Meir Disnan. What did Rabbi Meir say that reveals to us that Ein Sheni Oisa Shlishi? The following Tanaic source says, Kol Haton Bias Mayim Midivrei Sofrim, all those that require immersion in a mikveh on a rabbinic level, Midivrei Sofer means a rabbinic stringency is imposed on whatever case the source has in mind, the stringency being that they have to be immersed. Otherwise there's a rabbinic level tumah. Rashi cites some of the examples. It's not important for us right now to get into the examples, but just realize that these items or these situations that require immersion, midivrei sofrim, they have an assumed sheni level of tumah. And you can see that in Rashi, basically across from here, we've underlined that point in the Rashi. Kulam b'turas shniyim hit inum. They were laden with the status of a sheni level tumah. So now, those things, those situations, the most common of these situations are unwashed hands. Everyone is familiar, I'm sure, with the need for washing one's hands before eating bread. The washing of hands removes tumas yodayim. Otherwise, the hands are considered a sheni level of tumah. So, those things that are rabbinic, rabbinically need immersion or need purification, mitame es hakodesh, upoisel es hatruma, umuter bechulin, uvemaiser, divrei Rabbi Meir. The main point right now is muter b'chulin. We described the ton biasmayim are those things that require immersion or purification through water. They have a sheni level tuma. Notice that if one of those examples comes into contact with chulin, muter b'chulin, the chulin remains unaffected, indicating, as far as we said before, that there is no third level tuma. Sheni doesn't create a shlishi in chulin. Nor in Meiser, according to Rabbi Meir, v'chachamim osrim b'Meiser. There's a technical machlokes in this source between Rabbi Meir and the chachamim regarding do these things affect Meiser. Meiser referred to as Meiser Sheni, the tithe that is taken off of one's produce once every 4 out of the 7 years of the Shemitah cycle, first and second, fourth and fifth years. That produce is to be eaten in Yerushalayim. It has a certain level of sanctity. Do these things that require bias mayim, midivrei sofrim, ruin or metame meiser? So that's a machlokes. Let's just go over some other points in the source we didn't explain yet. We said that these things that require bias mayim, midivrei sofrim, metame hakodesh. That means that we used the example before of the hands. The hands will, if they touch sacrificial meat and have not been purified in water, so they will make the sacrificial meat tomei, and that sacrificial meat in turn can metame something else. So that if the hands are a sheni, the sacrificial meat would become a shlishi, and that sacrificial meat could then metame another piece of sacrificial meat, making it a revi'i. Posel satruma means that the ton bias mayim divrei sofrim. Again, we can use the hands example. If a person with his unpurified hands, unimmersed hands, touches truma, he ruins the truma, but that truma won't affect something else. It's the tuma stops there. Let's go on in the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi Ha-Dalmoran. Rabbi Yossi was the focus of our discussion in our previous year, hence the Gemara says, as far as Rabbi Yossi is concerned, it's in accordance with what we have said already. And here the Gemara says a little bit more. De'im isei, if it were so that Rabbi Yossi holds that there is a shlishi b'chulin, if you recall from our previous show on Daf Chavtes, Rabbi Yossi had addressed the issue, from where do you know that there is a revi b'kodesh? And he presented us with a kal v'chomer, starting with Mechusar Kippurim, and derived the idea of a revi b'kodesh. Now, if it were so that Rabbi Yossi acknowledges there is such a thing as shlishi b'chulin, well then, laisi l'revi b'truma v'chamishi b'kodesh. He could have extended the chain of tuma transmission even further than he did. He could have demonstrated that, well, if there's a shlishi b'chulin, that means that you could create a revi b'truma and even a chamishi, a fifth level, b'kodesh. But when you look back at Rabbi Yossi, you see him describing kodesh as reaching only a fourth level. That's predicated on the idea then that Rabbi Yossi says that the chulin itself can reach only a sheni level of tuma and not any more. Rabbi Yoshua Desnan. Rabbi Ozer Omer, we have here two Tanaic opinions, but we want to focus in on Rabbi Yeshua, who's the second opinion in this source. And we're going to learn more laws of rabbinic defilement. In this source, we deal with a person that eats a certain quantity of food that had become tomei. How does that food affect the person that's eating it? On a Torah level, tomei food would not affect a person, would not metame an individual. But these are rabbinic laws. Let's continue. Rabbi Ozer Omer, ha'oichel oichel rishon, rishon. A person who eats, oichel rishon means food. There's a verb and a noun over here. So you have ha'ochel is the verb, maybe it's called an adverb. It's the action of eating. It's one who is eating. Ochel rishon, first level food. Rishon means the person himself becomes a Rishon level of Tumah. Sheni, if you eat food that's a Sheni, you become a Sheni. Shlishi. And if you eat a third level Tumah food, you become a Shlishi. I always try to remember Rabbi Ozer by the saying, you are what you eat. So if you ate a Shlishi level food, you become a Shlishi level of Tumah. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, ha'oichel oichel rishon, ve'oichel sheni. According to Rabbi Yeshua, we wouldn't be able to say you are what you eat, because you see, if you're eating food that's rishon, or food that's sheni, you become a sheni. So that even though the food might be first level tumah, you drop down to a sheni. We're not going to get into the reasons behind Rabbi Yeshua, why he says what he does. That is discussed elsewhere. You can see that in Maseches Chulin, a more elaborate discussion. But for our purposes, we continue in the source. If you eat shlishi, now we have to point out ahead of time that this is a reference to you're eating chulin. Up till now we described you're eating chulin that's a first level tumah, or chulin that's a second level tumah. And here we continue with reference to chulin that's a third level tumah. Now that's very surprising, because we just said before that Rabbi Yeshua is one of those that holds that the sheni doesn't make a shlishi b'chulin. We'll explain that later. But for the time being, you're eating a chulin that's a third level tumah. What happens to the person? Sheni b'kodesh, v'ein sheni b'truma. It's a very unusual halacha, but as the eater, you shoot up to becoming a sheni, but only with regard to kodesh, with regard to sacrifices. That means, let's say, practically speaking, if you ate third level chulin food, then as a sheni, but kodesh, that means if you touch another piece of, let's say, of some sacrificial meat, that sacrificial meat will now become a shlishi, and it in turn can ruin another piece of sacrificial meat, making it a revi'i level of tumah. However, by eating shlishi of chulin, you don't become a sheni with regard to truma. You wouldn't affect truma. And here is the significant point. This whole idea of shlishi making you into a sheni b'kodesh, and we described you were eating chulin that was a shlishi level of tumah. That is b'chulin shenasu al taras truma. It's a very specific situation. This is a person that, in all likelihood, he's a Kohen. He wants to develop a lifestyle of, protection or routine of purity. So, what does he do? He accepts upon himself a type of vow that he treats his chulin as if it were truma, so that he would be very protective of his chulin, not allowing it to become tomei in the same way that he would be very protective of truma, which is very sensitive to becoming tomei. It's forbidden to eat truma tomei, for example. This source, Rabbi Yeshua, in this source is referring to a person, it's a unique case, where he treats his chulin as if it is truma. So if you treat your chulin as if it's truma, and that means that, you're just like truma can reach a shlishi level of tumah, your chulin can also reach a shlishi level of tumah. But it's only because you're treating it as if, or you're treating your chulin with the same standards that you treat truma. What about standard chulin that's owned by non-kohanim who don't live such a protective and cautious existence? That kind of chulin would never become a shlishi. And that's what the Gemara points out. Altara satruma in, and using the Girs of Rashi, we read chulin grady low. in order to discuss a third level of chulin, it's only in the context of one who treats his chulin with the same purity levels as one would treat truma. But chulin grady means standard chulin. No, there is no third level. Alma kosovar. This shows you that Rabbi Yeshua holds ein sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin, that chulin that has reached a sheni level of tumah, if it touches another piece of chulin, the other piece of chulin will remain unaffected. It doesn't become a third level. Rabbi Elazar Desanya. Rabbi Elazar also holds what? Ein sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin. As it says, Rabbi Ozer Omer, Shloshtan Shavim. The three are all the same. What do we mean by that? Harishon, a first level tumah, shebekodesh v'shebechulin v'shebetruma. That means if you have sacrificial meat or chulin food or truma tithes that became a rishon l'tumah, what effects does it have? What can it do by way of tumah transmission? Mitame shnayim upoisel echad b'kodesh. That means that, let's use as your starting point some chulin that's a rishon level tumah. It will impart tumah 2 levels down. That means it will make a sheni, and the sheni will make a shlishi, and that shlishi has the power to go one more step, but it will stop there at that 4th level. That's upoisel echad b'kodesh. That's called revi b'kodesh. And hence the word posil is used because the defilement stops at that point. What else can we say about a rishon of either kodesh, chulin, or truma? What else can we say? In the realm of truma, mitame echad upoisel echad b'truma. That means that if the rishon of any of those items that we mentioned, chulin, kodesh, or truma, touches a piece of truma, so the truma will become sheni, and it can passel, it'll transmit tuma one more step, but it will stop there if you're talking about truma. And here's the main point: upoisel echad b'chulin. There is no further steps. Namely, if you have some rishon food matter that's kodesh, chulin, or truma, and it touches chulin, what happens? The chulin, it becomes a sheni, but that's it. It doesn't affect any further, any more. It won't be able to affect another piece of chulin. What do we see? Ein sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin. Rabbi Eliezer Desnan. Where do we see Rabbi Eliezer holding ein sheni oisa shlishi? This 5th source, the 5th Tana, Rabbi Eliezer, deals with the topic of hafroshus challah. This is a tithe removed from dough given to kohanim, and challah has the same status as truma. The source will discuss the need of removing the challah tithe for dough that has become defiled. If you're going to remove or tithe the defiled dough itself, then the challah that you're removing from it itself will be tomei, and the Kohen will lose out insofar as he will have to burn it. It's like truma tamea. It's something you burn. You cannot eat it. What's the solution, therefore, if you have some dough that's become defiled? The idea is take another piece of dough that is tohor, that has not become defiled yet, and you haven't tithed it yet. So you have, we'll say you have a bowl of tohor, untithed dough. You remove the required amount that's needed for the challah tithe, and you'll be taking off enough We don't have to get into the details, 1/24th or 1/48th. These are details, but there's a certain amount, certain percentage that's required to take off of dough. You take off the necessary amount that will cover the, in addition to the tohor dough, it'll cover the tomei dough. Our focus in this discussion is you're going to be taking off enough tohor dough that you eventually will declare as a challah tithe to exempt the tomei dough. The problem over here is that in tithing, the tithe has to be next to, or maybe even more accurately, has to be in contact with the item being tithed. But it would be quite self-defeating over here if you're going to take the challah from tohor dough and attach it to the tomei dough. You'll end up ruining that piece that you're going to be declaring as challah. So in this source we'll discover a method, and the name or the halacha is referred to here. This idea of being connected is torei min mukaf. Mukaf means next to or attached to. And once again, the challah tithe that I'm removing from the tohor dough is going to exempt the tomei batter, the tomei dough, and we have to work out a way that the challah tithe is in contact with the tomei dough. So here, if you will forgive the pun, you want to have your cake and eat it too. And let's see how we accomplish that. Namely, that you'll be able to tithe a challah tithe that will remain tor, and at the same time fulfill the requirement of being min hamukaf. Tisnan. Rebbe Ozer Omer challah niteles min haTorah al haTameah. The challah tithe can be removed from or separated from tohor dough in order to exempt some tomei dough that you have. Ketzad, how do we describe this? Shtei isos achas torah v'achas tameah. He has two batters, two doughs. One is tohor and one is defiled. Noitel kedei challah me'isa shalohur mechalasa. He should take, kedei challah means a sufficient amount of dough to constitute a challah tithe, and you take that from a batter, from isa, from dough that hasn't been tithed yet. Otherwise, you would be taking from something that's poter ala chiyuv, which is not acceptable. So, and what do you then do? V'nosein, note, we have here Roman numeral number 1. There's going to be a second version later. This is a Mishnah later. We're going to be quoting from a Brisa, a different type of Tanaic source. Here it says, v'nosein pachos mikabetza be'emtza kedei litol min hamukaf. So you set up a type of row over here. You've got your tomei dough, and then pachos mikabetza means an amount of tohor dough that is less than an egg quantity, and you take that pachos mikabetza of tohor dough, put it next to the tomei dough, and then next to this pachos mikabetza of tohor dough, you put your challah tithe. Kedei litol min hamukaf. With this, we've established a sense of connection, of continuity between the tomei batter and the challah dough, the dough that's going to be declared as challah to exempt this tomei batter. And the connection is made by taking a small amount of tohor dough and putting it between the two. And if you do that, so then you're being noitel min hamukaf, where you're fulfilling the idea of having the tithe connected to that which is being tithed. We continue at the top of Omid Beis, v'chachomim oisrim. The chachomim do not accept that. V'tanya, there's a second version of what is the quantity of that middle dough that's going to connect the challah on the one side with the tomei batter on the other side. How much is in the middle? Kibetza. A full egg quantity of tahor dough. It's important to point out that these sources 1 and 2 are both according to Rebbe Eliezer. The Chachamim do not accept that. As we go on in the Gemara, you notice triangles. On the side under the Mivneh heading, these are Hezberim, Amah, Cholkim, Rebbe Ozer, V'Chachamim. What are they arguing about? Rebbe Ozer mati losim kebeitza chulin torim be'emtza. Rebbe Ozer allows putting an egg quantity of chulin, tahor chulin in the middle. V'Chachamim she'osrim, we have to find out what are they saying, what is the reason for them, they who prohibit. So structurally, we're going to present several options. It's through the first option that will eventually reveal that Rebbe Ozer holds ein sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin. Let's see, how do we get to that? So now we continue. Savruha. We're going to work with the following assumption. Idi v'idi be'isa rishona. Both are the brisa that speaks about a kibetza in the middle, and the Mishnah that spoke about a pachos mikibetza in the middle. Both are addressing a case where the tomei dough is a rishon l'tuma. V'chulin hatvulin l'chalo lo kechala domu. The word tvulin is based on the word tevel. Tevel is something untithed. The hunk of dough that you separated from the tohar bowl that you're going to consider the challah tithe, you haven't designated it, let's say verbally, as challah yet. You plan to. You're going to do that. You're going to say harezeh challah. You're going to say, you're going to make a statement of dedication that this is challah. You will a pronouncement, but you haven't done it yet. So what it is, that dough prior to your pronouncement is essentially chulin with the potential of challah in it. That's called chulin hatvulin l'challah. How do we look at it? Do we look at it, how do we identify it? Do we identify it as chulin, namely as it is now, or do we identify it in terms of its potential, namely it becoming challah? So we're working with the assumption, our second assumption here is that chulin hatvulin l'challah lo kechallah damu. It does not have challah status. Rather, it has chulin status. Don't forget, we said quite a bit earlier that challah, that real challah, that means truly dedicated, tithed challah, is the same as truma. And as we've seen so many times already, truma is more sensitive to tuma than chulin is. So what have we said so far? We have, first of all, the setup. We have a little illustration in the margin describing the setup. You've got the isa that's tmeya. You've got on the other side, on the right-hand side, you can see what you have. We call it challah, but it's right now it hasn't been pronounced as challah yet. And then you've got that thing in the middle, which is either it's a pachos mikabetza or a kabetza of isa tahora. The assumption right now is that the isa that's tmeya is a rishon l'tuma. The little piece of dough in the middle is going to become tameh. It's going to become a sheni. Does it transmit tuma to the challah, to that other piece that's going to be declared as challah? Well, let's continue in the Gemara. My lav beha komiflagi. Is it not so that the following is the point of controversy? The more sovar, Rebbe Eliezer, who allows putting, even according to the brisa, according to the source number 2, allows putting a full egg quantity of dough in the middle, ein sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin. Why does he allow that? Because even though, as a kibetza, not only does it absorb tumah, but it, technically speaking, if it were a rishon, for example, it would pass on tumah to something else. But what happens over here? it becomes a sheni because of its contact with the isa tamea, which is a rishon. The thing in the middle becomes a sheni, and the challah, which is, as we said, it's really chulin hatavulin l'challah. It has chulin status. It remains unaffected. It remains unaffected, so that once I set it up like this, I can then pronounce that the potential challah as being challah. Of course, when you make the pronouncement, let's say a second before the pronouncement, you'll take it away. You'll push it off to the side, not leaving it remaining in contact with that piece in the middle. But before you make the challah pronouncement regarding that piece that we labeled as challah, before you make the pronouncement, it's essentially chulin. And what do we see from here? And this is the whole point of bringing this discussion in. That Rebbe Eliezer, who allows you putting in even a kibetza quantity in the middle, it's because though it becomes a sheni, the tuma doesn't go any further. Ein sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin. Umor sovar, the Rabbanan who prohibit, well, they hold sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin. And if you put an egg quantity of tohar dough in contact with the isa tamea, that's a rishon, so the isa tamea, that's a rishon, is going to make that middle stuff sheni, and that middle thing is going to then ruin the challah that you wanted to preserve as tohar. You won't be able to. Now, I should just point out, as far as what is the difference between having the kibetza there versus having a pachos mikibetza, the idea of having pachos mikibetza, according to the Roman numeral number 1, the Mishnah source, it's not because the Mishnah holds that the sheni would make a shlishi, but rather, as Rashi says, how the Mishnah reflects a philosophy that whatever you can do to minimize tuma, do so. That piece in the middle, it's going to become tomei, but you're not supposed to metame chulin. The only reason we're allowing this over here is for the sake of accomplishing a proper hafroshas truma. So we're going to compromise the general objection to being metame chulin, but if you're already going to metame chulin, try to metame as little as possible. Therefore, we're telling you to put there a pachos mikabetza. There's another explanation you can find in Rashi as well, but this is getting off into a bit of a detail, which, for our purposes, we are here to show how Rebbe Eliezer holds ein sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin, and we've accomplished that by saying the fact that Rebbe Eliezer in Roman numeral 2 allows you to put a full beitza quantity of tohar dough there, and it will not affect the next piece of dough, which is going to be declared as challah, shows us that ein sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin. The Gemara, though, rejects this analysis of the machlokes. Omar Rav Mori Brei Rav Kahana. The Kulei Alma, everyone, even the Rabbanan agree, not just Rebbe Eliezer, but even the Rabbanan agree, ein sheni oisa shlishi b'chulin. Well, if that's the case, so why would the Rabbanan object to putting a kibetza quantity of tohar dough in the middle? The challah is not going to get affected. Well, you'll see right now that according to the Rabbanan, it will. According to this version number 2, Rav Mori's version is that the definition of that hunk of dough that's going to be declared or pronounced as challah, what is its status right now? That is their controversy between Rebbe Ozer and the Chachamim. More sovar kechallah damu. The Rabbanan who prohibit setting up the doughs as we did above, the reason for that is because the challah that is as yet unpronounced, not dedicated as challah, but the fact that it's potentially challah, it's treated with a challah standard right now. Now a challah standard is like a truma standard, and that middle piece being in contact with the Isa Tameah, is going to become a sheni, and a sheni will affect challah. So the Rabbanan don't allow that setup. Umor Savar, Rebbe Eliezer holds lo kechala damu, that chulin hatvulin l'chala, chulin that has the latent challah in it, is not viewed as challah, it's viewed as chulin. And we have said already that ein sheni oiseh shlishi b'chulin. So there's no problem with this setup. The Iboy Yisayim, a third analysis, the kule alma, chulin hatvulin l'chala loy kechala damu, that we're now saying that everyone holds that that's not the point of machlokas between Rebbe Ozer and the Chachamim. And what else does everyone hold by? V'ein sheni oiseh shlishi b'chulin. Well, if that's the case, why would the Rabbanan object to having the kibetza of dough in the middle? V'hacha b'muter ligrom tumo l'chulin sheberetz Yisrael kamiflagi. Here the machlokas isn't focused on will the challah be affected. The machlokas is actually focused on that middle piece. More sovar, Rebbe Eliezer, who says, go right ahead and set it up like that, like we illustrated above. Muter ligrom tuma l'chulin sheberetz Yisrael. There's nothing wrong with causing tuma to fall upon chulin. So I'm defiling that middle piece. No problem. What am I in effect doing? I'm defiling chulin. Is it going to affect the next piece, the challah? No, it's not going to affect it, because everyone holds ein sheni oiseh shlishi b'chulin, and that unpronounced hunk of challah dough is viewed as chulin. It's not viewed as challah. So if you say that it's muter lidroim tuma l'chulin sheberetz Yisrael, go ahead and set it up like that. But once again, here our focus is on, are we doing anything wrong by putting in that middle piece? Well, more savar, the Rabbanan say, osir ligrom tuma l'chulin sheberetz Yisrael. You're not allowed to make something that is tahor and make it tomei, even if it happens to be just chulin. Rashi elaborates in his commentary on this sugya, filling in, I'm sure, a lot of questions that you might have, which we have not dealt with. Further analysis of the two sources, one and Roman numeral 1 and 2. One said pachos mikbeitza, the other says kibetza. Why? What's the difference between those two Rebbe Eliezer's sources? But for our purposes, we want to keep things streamlined, and we attempted to show how Rebbe Eliezer was of the opinion that ein sheni oiseh shlishi b'chulin, and as the Gemara unfolded, it turns out that it's not just Rebbe Eliezer, but it's the Rabbanan agree with that as well. You saw that in stage 2 of the analysis, and likewise in stage 3, that ein sheni oiseh shlishi b'chulin. For our purposes, the difference between stage 1 and stages 2 and 3 is that in stage 1 we were saying it's only Rebbe Eliezer that holds ein sheni oiseh shlishi b'chulin, and stage 2 and 3 it's not just Rebbe Eliezer, it's the Rabbanan as well that happened to argue with Rebbe Eliezer, and we had to explain, if they're not arguing over the issue of ein sheni oiseh shlishi b'chulin, what are they arguing about? And we saw those further explanations in stage 2 and stage 3. We continue in the Gemara. A citation from the Mishnah. This section of the Mishnah that we're going to quote now dealt with the Levite cities and the resolution of two psukim. One pasuk indicating that there's 1,000 amos around the Levi cities, and another pasuk indicating there's 2,000 amos around the Levite cities. Rabbi Kiva, his method of resolving the two psukim is as follows: that 1,000 amos is for the migrash, is to be left uncultivated and unbuilt, and the 2,000 is a reference to Tchum Shabbos. 2,000 amos is the distance from which the maximum distance a person can walk from the edge of a city outwards on Shabbos. The other Tanaic opinion in the Mishnah, said that the pasuk indicating 1,000 amas around the Levite cities is for Migrash, and the pasuk indicating 2,000 amas was that the second 1,000 amas outside the city is for cultivation, for ginos and for sodas and pardesim, for cultivation purposes for the Levium that lived in those cities. The Gemara now says, "B'mai komifligi." What's the underlying point of machlokas between Rabbi Akiva on the one hand and Rabbi Ozer on the other hand? Mor savar tchumin doraisa. Rabbi Akiva says that the restriction of walking beyond the city boundaries on Shabbos of 2,000 amas is a Torah-based prohibition. Umor savar, Rabbi Ozer, who made no mention of Tchum Shabbos in his description of the 2,000 amas, he said that the 2,000 amas was a reference to cultivating that area outside the city. He holds that Tchumin de Rabbanan, the restriction of going 2,000 amas on Shabbos beyond the city's limits, that restriction is rabbinic. So Rabbi Akiva holds Tchumin d'oraisa, and Rabbi Ozer Tchumin de Rabbanan. As we go on, we deal with the topic, and you can see on the side of the Gemara we have our nosei / mivne heading. A diamond appears, and you'll also see the use of a double underline. These are shitos beketzad omru shiras hayam. Different opinions in how the Jewish people, along with Moshe Rabbeinu, recited the shiras hayam. Shiras hayam, maybe you're more familiar with it by referring to it as the Oz Yoshir. It's part of our daily prayers. The Shachris, every Shachris, as part of the Psukei de Zimra, you say shiras hayam. Tonu Rabbanan. Bo Bayom Dorash Rabbi Akiva. On that day that Rabbi Ozer ben Azariah was appointed to Rosh Yeshiva, as is featured in Maseches Brochus, Rabbi Akiva taught B'shal Sha'olu Yisrael min hayam nosnu eineim lomar shira. When they ascended from the split sea, they gave their eyes over. In other words, they looked forward to reciting the shira. The Ketzad Amru Shira. How did they say the shira? Kegadol hamakre es hahalel. Like a gadol, and another couple lines you're going to see another approach that talks about a cotton hamakre es hahalel. A gadol hamakre es hahalel is in a public setting. One person recites the Hallel for the congregation. What do the members of the congregation do in that type of setup? So, how is that done? We said, Kigodol hamakras ha'Hallel, v'hein oinin achrov roshei prokim. In the case of Hallel, for example, one person, the designated individual, the Godol as referred to here, he would recite line by line the Hallel, and at the end of each verse that he recites, the congregation will say Hallelujah. Hallelujah is the word that constitutes the beginning of the different paragraphs that make up the Hallel. That's what is meant here by the public response, Hein Oinen Achrov Roshei Prokim, the beginning of each chapter. Now, in the case of what we want to do is we want to transpose that approach that we find by the Hallel now to the Oz Yoshir. Moshe Omar Ashira Lashem Vehein Omrim Ashira Lashem. Moshe Omar Ki Ga'oi Ga'o. Here Moshe Rabbeinu is continuing in the Shiras Hayam. He says Ki Ga'o Ga'o, which is that which follows the expression of Ashira Lashem. Said Ashira Lashem Ki Ga'o Ga'o. So Moshe would then say Ki Ga'o Ga'o Vehein Omrim, and they would say Ashira Lashem. And it would go on phrase by phrase, verse by verse, like that. And each time the the Gadol is in the case of the Shir Hasayam, each time Moshe Rabbeinu was saying a new phrase of the Shir Hasayam, the public responded by saying Ashira Lashem. That's called responding with Roshei Prokim. I know it might sound a little confusing. We assume Oz Yoshir Moshe, that's the beginning. No, that's not the beginning of the actual song. That's telling you that when they crossed the sea, that Moshe said the Shir Hasayam. What was the content of the Shir Hasayam? Well, that begins with Ashira Lashem. So that's called the Roshei Prokim, the beginning of the chapter. Another opinion, how was the Shir Hasayam recited? Rebbe Lezer beno shel Rabbi Yosef Glili Omer kekotan hamakris halel. If a person himself doesn't, let's say he doesn't know how to recite the Hallel, and all he has around him is a minor, so the minor, the kotan, can read the Hallel for the adult. What does the adult have to do though? V'hein oinin achrov kol ma shehu omer. So in the case of the Hallel, the minor would say a pasuk, and the adult listener will repeat word for word what the minor said. But then the minor will go on to the next phrase, and the listener, who's a gadol, will then repeat word for word the new phrase, and phrase by phrase, what the kotan says, the listener would repeat. Now, how does that work out in the case of the Shir Hasayam? Moshe Omar Ashira Lashem, Vein Omrim Ashira Lashem. Moshe Omar Ki Ga'o Ga'o, Vein Omrim Ki Ga'o Ga'o. In other words, whatever Moshe said, they would repeat. It's in that fashion that the Shir Hasayam was recited. By the way, all of this is based on the word Leimor, and we had seen that in the Mishnah. That it tells us that the recitation of the Shir Hasayam was done in a special fashion, where you had the community, where the nation of Israel were responding to that which Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. In how were they responding? So far we've seen two opinions. The first opinion said their response was simply to constantly repeat the expression Ashira Lashem, which is called the Rosh Perek. According to the second approach, the public would say whatever Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. They would repeat phrase for phrase. A third approach, Rabbi Nechemia Omer, Kesofer HaPuris al Shma B'Beis HaKnesses. Sofer is a teacher. Children used to learn in shuls. So the Sofers, the child's teachers, they were located in synagogues. And Puris al Shma, without getting into, let's say, literal translations and details, the Rashi explains that when the community would get together to recite Kriyat Shema, so the Chazan, the one leading the davening, he would say the opening bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu Melech Ha'olam, Yotzer Or Uvorei Choshech, Oseh Shalom Uveres Hakol, and the Tzibur, after hearing him say the opening bracha, they would then say the opening bracha, and everyone would continue reading together, namely the Chazan along with the congregation. So that as far as Rabbi Nechemia is concerned, Moshe Rabbeinu, let's say, functioned on his own only with regard to the opening. As the source says, Shehu Poseach Tchila V'hein Oinin Achrav. Moshe Rabbeinu in this case would open up Ashira Lashem Ki Ga'o Ga'o, or maybe just say Ashira Lashem, and then the Tzibur would respond Ashira Lashem, and then from that point onwards they would say it all together. Now what's, of course, you might be asking, how in the world would the Tzibur know what to say if they're not hearing it first from Moshe Rabbeinu, but rather saying it simultaneously with Moshe Rabbeinu? So the explanation for that is that there was a divine spirit, a type of prophecy that came over the entire Jewish nation, instructing them as to what to say without needing to have heard it first from Moshe Rabbeinu. Hence they were able to say it all together. B'mai komifligi. What's the underlying point of controversy between these three different approaches. Rabbi Kiva Savar Lamor, as we saw in the pasuk, Vayomru Lamor. So the word Lamor, what is that a reference to? Amilsa Kamaisa. And according to Rabbi Kiva, the Jewish people were instructed to say the opening phrase each time. Each time Moshe Rabbeinu moved on to a new phrase, they would say Milsa Kamaisa, the first phrase. Rabbi Ozer ben Osher Rabbi Yosef Glili Savar Lamor Akol Milsa Umilsa, that they were instructed to say phrase by phrase whatever Moshe Rabbeinu said, they would have to say. Rabbi Nechemia Savar Vayomru, remember the pasuk says Vayomru Lamor, so he focuses on the word Vayomru as well as Lamor. And what is his conclusion? Vayomru means the Amur Kulhu Bahadi Hadodi. Vayomru, they are all to say it together. Lamor, what does that teach me? The Pasach Moshe Bereisha, that he would open up by himself, the tzibur listening to that opening phrase, they would say the opening phrase, and then from that point onwards, they would all say it together, as is derived from the word Vayomru. Tonu Rabbanan. Before we continue, we should note on the side we have a topic heading which reads Afilu Hatinoikos Amru Hashira. We're going to see in this source that even very young, and in fact, we'll see an opinion, even the unborn said Shira. Said this Shiras Hayam. Dorash Rabbi Yosef Glili Pishol She'olu Yisrael Min Hayam Nosno Eneim Lomar Shira. As the Jewish people ascended from the split sea, they desired to say song. V'ketzad Omru Shira. How did they recite this special song of praise? Oilel Mutol Al Birke Imo V'tinok Yoinek Mishtei Imo. The Olel is a toddler. He's older than a tinok. A tinok is an infant that's nursing. Olel, a little bit older. So the olel lying on its mother's knees, the tinok nursing from its mother's breasts. Kevon shiro es hashchina, when they noted, they saw, they perceived the divine presence. Olel higbiat savara v'tinok shama dod mipiv. The toddler picked up its neck, raised its head. The infant stopped suckling. The Omru, and they said, Ze Keli V'Anveu. This is they had clarity. They recognized this is the divine presence. This is God, and I will exalt Him. Of course, when we see things like this, one has to understand it's not as if there's some form that they saw, but it's a type of spiritual recognition of an intense divine presence. And they noted that. And if you look back on Daf Yud Aleph Omid Beis, there's reference made over there to how the Mitzrayim oppressed the newborns. They were absorbed into the ground miraculously as the Mitzrayim were trying to trample them, and they experienced the divine presence at that time. So you can rest assured that they were able to recognize the divine presence later on. Truth is, though, that those were infants in Mitzrayim. Here we have infants at the crossing of the sea sometime later. Nevertheless, this the association that we're making is this recognition on the part of the very young of the Shechina. And how do you know? How does Rabbi Yosef Lili know this? Shenamar, it says in the pasuk, "Mipi oilim v'yoinkim yisadet ha'ois," from the mouths of toddlers and suckling ones, yisadet ha'ois, you established strength. Hoya Rabbi Meir Omer, minayin shafilu ubrim shemei iman amrushir. From where do you know that even the as yet unborn, the ubrim or fetuses in the wombs of their mothers, they said Shira. Shenamar, the pasuk says, we continue at the top of Daf Lamed Aleph, B'makelois Bohu Elokim Hashem Mimakor Yisrael. So you have Makelos is a gathering of people as they gathered on the sea. They praise God from where? Mimakor Yisrael. Makor is the womb, from the, literally it has to do with a source. It's the source from which a human being emerges. From there, even as yet unborn, they were praising the Almighty. Bo Bayom, and here we continue with another quote from the Mishnah, and the focus here is with regard to Eov. Was his service of God out of love or out of fear? The Mishnah had quoted the pasuk, Hein Yikteleni Loi Ayachel. The gist of that pasuk is they can be killing me, and nevertheless, and then lo, and then here the problem is, how do we deal with that word? Ayachel. Ayachel is to pray toward, to hope for, to be connected with. So the Gemara, first we quote the Mishnah, Bo Bayom Dorash Rabbi Yeshua ben Horkanis Shelo Ovad Eov v'chulei. We had the two opinions in the Mishnah. How did Eov serve God? Did he serve him out of fear or out of love? The Gemara is going to ask, why is there any doubt about the service of Eov if it's a question of how to understand the pasuk Hein Yikteleni Lo Ayachel? Why not just look in the Torah and see, look in the scriptures that is, and see whether the word Lo is spelled Lamed Vav or is it spelled Lamed Aleph? If it's spelled Lo Ayachel Lamed Vav, that means that even if I'm being killed, I still look forward to God. That is a sign of extreme devotion and love. If it's spelled Lamed Aleph, then he's saying, as they're killing me, I have no need to look forward to God anymore. A sign of distancing himself. Certainly not an expression of love. So the Gemara asks, let's read it now inside. V'lechsi hai lo. Why not just look into the scriptures and see. I belamed aleph ksiv lohu. If it's spelled with an aleph, then it's lo, meaning it's negation. I won't look forward to God anymore. I belamed vav ksiv. And if it's spelled with a vav, then lo hu. Then it's him. I am looking forward to him, even in my most dire of straits. The Gemara responds that just by looking at the way the word is written is not going to solve our dilemma or our doubt. V'chol heicha d'chsiv belamed aleph lohu, where the word is spelled lamed aleph, does that necessarily mean negation? Elo me'ata, there's a pasuk that says b'chol tzarasam lo tsar, that in all of their troubles, lo, lamed aleph, tsar. Tsar means to feel the pain. Dichtiv b'lamed aleph, it's spelled with lamed aleph. Hachinami delohu, are you going to say that in fact that when the Jewish people are suffering, so the Almighty Kiviyachol doesn't feel any sense of strife or of pain? And if you say, yeah, that's what it means, that when the Jews are suffering, God doesn't feel any pain. Kiviyachol. But you can't say that. That's not the pshat in the pasuk. That's not the explanation. The Haksiv, the continuation of the pasuk says, "Umalach panav hoshiam," that there is that the Almighty sends an angel to save them. Elo mashma hachi umashma hachi. The word, even if it's spelled lamed aleph, can have a connotation of negation, and it can be an expression of wonderment, of like lo tsar in this case. Is he not concerned? Does he not feel their pain? Or like with regard to Eov, Hein Yiftaleni, they could be killing me, and I'm not going to look forward to God. Of course I am. So that it can go this way or that way, and hence the there was room for argument. We saw in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hyrcanus was convinced that Eov was serving God out of ahava, out of love, and it's true that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was presented later in the Mishnah as saying that no, Eov was serving God only out of fear. Tanya, Rabbi Meir Omer, Nemar Yirei Elokim b'Eov, and Nemar Yirei Elokim b'Avram. With regard to both of these personalities, you find the expression Yirei Elokim. Ma Yirei Elokim homur b'Avram me'avo, just like the expression Yirei Elokim, which Yira generally is translated as fearing, but in the case of Avram, we know that he didn't serve God out of fear. So just because we know by Avram his service of God was out of love, so Af Yirei Elokim Omer b'Eov me'avo. So too, though the term Yirei Elokim appears by Eov, one should recognize that Eov's service to God was out of love. Avram Gufei Minolan, and Avram itself, how do you know that he was serving God out of love? Dichtiv Zera Avraham Ohavi. The pasuk describes the seeds of Avraham, the one that loved me. My ika bein oise me'ava la'oise mi'ira. What difference is there between one who serves out of love versus one who serves out of fear? Ika ha desanya. There is the following difference that's taught in this source. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Godol ha'oisem me'ava yosem min oisem mi'ira. Greater is one who fulfills the will of Hashem out of a sense of love and devotion, more so than one who does so out of a sense of fear. Shezeh tolui le'elef dor, v'zeh tolui le'alpayim dor. The merits of one who serves out of fear will serve to benefit 1,000 generations. One who serves God out of love, his merits will serve to benefit even 2,000 generations. Hochaksiv la'alofim lo havai u'l'shomrei mitzvosai. See, the word la'alofim is the word 1,000 in plural form, so it's at least 2,000. V'hasam ksiv, and the pasuk in Dvarim says, u'l'shomrei mitzvosav le'elef dor. Shomrei mitzvosav is taken to mean yira. Yira, Rashi points this out, so that in the Aleph pasuk we have alofim lo avai l'shomrei mitzvosai. In pasuk Beis you have shomrei mitzvosav le'elef dor. Only 1,000 generations will benefit from this individual's merit. The Gemara asks, but hasam nami ksiv lo avov u'l'shomrei mitzvosav le'elef dor. So you see, the elef dor is found in the pasuk, but simply by reading one word before that which was quoted in the source, you see the presence of lo ohavav. The Gemara says that doesn't present a problem. Hai l'desomich lei, v'hai l'desomich lei. If you look at these two psukim that we quoted, the word ohavai where the aleph is just a couple lines up, la'alofim lo havai l'shomrei mitzvosai. It's true in that pasuk you also saw shomrei, which is an expression of yira, but which word is next to la'alofim? The word ohavai. In the Beis pasuk, which word is closest to elef dor? It's true in that pasuk it said lo ahavav u'l'shomrei mitzvosav le'elef dor, but in that pasuk the elef dor, the mere 1,000 generations, that is closest to samech to shomrei, the ones that fear. Hence our conclusion that when it comes to serving out of ava, the merit lasts for 2,000 generations. Serving out of fear, the merit lasts for 1,000 generations. Hanotrei Talmidei Dahavu Yasvi Kamei de Rava. There were two students seated in the presence of Rava. Chad Omarle, one said, Akrun b'chamoi, I was shown in my dream. Akriyun, literally it was read to me in my dream. Ma rav tuvucha asher tzofantu lireyecha. That was the pasuk that he heard in his dream. V'chad Omarle Akrun b'chamoi, and the other one said it was recited to me in my dream. V'yismechu kol choisei boch li'olam yiranenu, v'yaltzu boch ohavei shemecha. So Rava, upon hearing these two reports, Omar lahu travaichu rabbanan tzadiki gemuratun. He says, both of you are completely righteous individuals. Mar me'ava umar me'ira. The difference between you is that one serves out of love and the other serves out of a sense of fear. As you can see, with the Siyata Dishmaya, so we've reached the end of the 5th parak of Sotah. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.